Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breeze Time with Kathy. Today we'll have part 2 of my trip to the Vatican Museum, which I took in May of 2014. I hope you enjoy it. Well, this is the second half of my visit to the Vatican Museum I took in 2014. Of course, this is just my impressions of the things that really stood out for me personally. Well, of course, we have to go to the Pio Christian Museum, which is basically the early Christian museum. I'm fascinated by early Christianity in the first few centuries, like before 3 or 400 BC AD. This is one of the oldest statue depictions of Jesus that we have. We see him here as the Good Shepherd. A lot of the sculptural information we have comes from burials, Christian burials. These are sarcophagus. It was very popular, particularly after the time of Constantine, for Christians to be buried, wealthy Christians to be buried in these very elaborate sarcophaguses. Look at the detail on this one. Here we have Mary and Jesus. These are the three wise men and their camels, and look, they're following the star. He's even pointing out the star in case you missed it. This is, of course, early medieval type of work, probably about the fifth or 6th century. But it is truly, truly impressive. This is another depiction on a sarcophagus. This we have the story of the resurrection of Lazarus. See, there's Jesus, very young, very commanding, powerful. Probably, I think this one was from about the 3rd or 4th century. And then we have a Bible story here. This is Jonah being thrown overboard and being swallowed up by the whale, or the beast, or the Leviathan. They didn't quite know what it was that swallowed Jonah. But they called it a Leviathan, which we assume was probably a whale. Now, these are just simple clay lanterns. They were used extensively, from the time of Christ and then for hundreds of years. I actually have one from about the time of Christ, an original one from Samaria that my husband gave me as a gift. And they're just made of clay. They're pretty fragile. They were sort of the common flashlights of the day. What you would do is you would fill it with oil. This is looking down from above. If you notice, these all are imprinted with Chi and Rho, which is the monogram of Jesus, the first 2 letters of Jesus Christ in the Greek alphabet. But you would fill it with oil. You would lay the wick in here. Of course, the wick would absorb the oil, and you would burn it, and you would be able to walk carrying it around in your open hand, in your open palm, and sort of in your palm, and use it to light your way. They were portable, but they were fragile. There's thousands and thousands of them in the catacombs, many of them broken. There's another example of the Chi and the Rho, the monogram of Jesus. It was used, as I said in my last talk, the Chi Rho monogram of Jesus was the earliest symbol that was used after Christianity became legitimate. Remember, the cross did not emerge as a symbol of Christianity until it ceased to be used in executions by the Romans. And then it became more and more important. But at the time of Constantine, when Christianity was decriminalized and became legal, and then within a few decades became the official religion of the Roman Empire, execution by crucifixion was still legal, and the cross therefore was a symbol of the worst, the most ignoble kind of death, demeaning and painful and torturous kind of death that Rome would inflict on anyone. As a matter of fact, one of the privileges of being a Roman citizen was you got assured that if you condemned to die, you wouldn't have to be crucified. You'd be beheaded instead. That's why we believe Paul was beheaded. He was a Roman citizen, whereas St. Peter, for example, was crucified. This is actually an early Christian piece of glass. This is very tiny, not much larger than a silver dollar, I think. And look at the detailed painting in gold foil. It says Peter and Paul, Petrus and Paulus. But some of the painting on gold for this type of thing must have been very popular. This is believed to be one of the saints, though we don't know which one. But the detail here again on something no larger than a silver dollar is just fantastic. This gold cross would have been a pendant, rather large pendant. But you see, this is more into the 4th and 5th century. You see Jesus. This is what you think of when you see early medieval work. And here is Jesus in the middle, crucified, and we have the saints surrounding him. This is one of the saints also. Now the contemporary collection of contemporary art. I didn't think about it when I went to the Vatican Museum that there'd be contemporary art there, but there was. It was amazing. This is actually by Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh. He didn't do a lot of religious painting, though he himself was very religious. He painted this Pieta just a few months before his death in 1890. And it really shows the agony of Mary. He depicted her, he called it the mother of sorrows, and he depicted her in her grief. He painted this for his sister. Rodin's The Thinker. There were actually 22, I found out there were 22 casts of this particular statue done by Rodin, this bronze sculpture. And this is actually one that was done after his death. But it is very impressive. They're in different sizes and they're all over, but here is one of them. People say Rodin was influenced by Michelangelo, look at the muscular frame on the Thinker, and you realize, yeah, could be. He probably was impressed with Michelangelo. We'll see lots more of Michelangelo when we get to the Sistine Chapel. This right here is Salvador Dali. This is called an angelic landscape. He's a surrealist master. The colors are interesting, but there's something about it that is just disquieting to me, and I'm not quite sure why. But still, I looked at this one for a while, and I wasn't sure whether I liked it or not. But considering it took up, I gave it so much attention, I thought I'd put it here for you. This one, I think, is what is really even more impressive by Salvador Dali. Christ Crucified. He painted this in 1954. This one, as a surrealist image. I love this one. And I don't even like surrealism. I'm a very traditional kind of person, but this is just breathtaking. Now we continue on to the Borgia apartments. The Borgia apartments were really very fascinating. They're beautifully decorated. They're quite impressive. But one of the most interesting things about the Borgia apartments is the man who lived there. His name was Rodrigo de Borgia. And if you recognize the name, if the Borgia name sounds familiar, it's because they were extremely controversial. They've sort of become synonymous. The name Borgia has become synonymous with nepotism and corruption, and really the church at this time was extremely corrupt. He was particularly, Rodrigo, who became Alexander the Sixth, was particularly noted controversial because he had at least four mistresses, and he had several children that he acknowledged fathering. And as a matter of fact, he even, for example, his son Cesare was 17 years old and still a student at Pisa, and he made him Archbishop of Valencia, Spain. Now that's really strange because I'm not 100% sure he was even a priest yet, but that just goes to show you the kind of things that he did. He had made himself very wealthy. His uncle had an uncle who had been Pope, Pope Sixtus, who was also considered the first Borgia Pope. Rodrigo here, Alexander the Sixth, is considered the second Borgia Pope. And of course, among his daughters, you've heard of Lucretia Borgia. She's quite infamous. And his son Cesare was also quite infamous himself. They truly, it was a time. He had his family, his mistresses, live in the papal apartments with him there at the Vatican. Anyway, he became Pope in 1492, and if that sounds familiar, because that was the year that Columbus was credited with discovering the New World. It's certainly when Renaissance Europe woke up, realized there was a New World, and he would become very influential because he was originally Spanish. And he was asked by the Spanish monarchy to confirm their ownership of the new lands, which is something that he actually did. He granted Spain the rights to the newly discovered America, and he even gave them permission, as this is said, to enslave the natives. It was believed that if by enslaving the natives, you could more easily convert them to Christianity. And he was just extremely corrupt and libertine in his practices. As a matter of fact, there was a priest in Florence who launched tried to start a movement against papal corruption and appealed to the General Council and to confront Pope Alexander the Sixth, or the Rodrigo Borgia, on his corruption. And Alexander is reported to the priest made a list of everything that supposedly Alexander had done, and Pope Alexander is reported to have been reduced to laughter when the list of offenses were read against him. It was really a time of instability. Right after his death, well, immediately before his death and right after his death, there were rival factions trying to claim the papacy. As a matter of fact, after he died, a man would be elected. They couldn't decide who should be elected, and finally Pope Pius the third was elected, and he only served for 5 months. They picked a frail old man as a sort of compromise pope because there were two strong factions, the Borgias and another faction that were trying to vying for the papacy. But his successor only lived a few months, and as pope. And then following that, Julius II was elected, and Julius II becomes the next pope. But he said that I will not live in the same rooms as the Borgias. As Borgia lived. He desecrated the Holy Church as none other before. And as a matter of fact, he ordered the Borgia apartments sealed. And they remained sealed until the 19th century. You've got to think that was from the 1500s to the 19th century, almost 400 years. The apartments, for 400 years, the apartments remained sealed. But the painting and the artwork there is quite spectacular. I mean, look at this. It's just the height of Renaissance. When you think Renaissance art, every available space is painted. The apartments, this is one of the room in the apartments. It's very impressive. This right here is a very interesting mural because it shows the resurrection of Christ. Of course, the tomb doesn't exactly have a rolling stone. It's more like the sarcophaguses that they used in early Christianity, and even through this time, these same sarcophagi were being used. But interestingly enough, right here in the corner, we have Pope Julius himself painted in there. He was attending the resurrection, very devout, very pious man. He often painted that. He wanted himself. This is a painting, actually was in the apartments. This is a copy. And the first copy of this was made in the Renaissance times because this painting was so controversial. It was in his private apartments that it was torn down. And the reason it was torn down is because this woman, who is seen as Mary, was rumored to have been one of his mistresses. So eventually, 50 years later, the Pope, there was still so much controversy about this painting, even though the apartments were sealed, that they went ahead and they tore it down. This is a copy they have of it. But he's a man who definitely liked to see himself portrayed in art. Here he is in all his papal finery. But the artwork is spectacular. Look at Christ resurrected. This predates Raphael and Michelangelo by about 20 years, I think. 15 or 20 years. And of course, it's quite a dramatic change in the time of Michelangelo and particularly, and also Raphael. But look at that painting of Christ. It's very, very dramatic. And really, everything is so impressive. This is the story of Christ. There's the Annunciation. And over here, in the right panel, we have the birth of Jesus. This is the presentation. You have the wise men. Of course, they had them coming in on horses instead of camels. But here they are, honoring Jesus, honoring newborn Jesus, giving him their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There was also depictions of the saints. This particular one is really dramatic. It's the story of Saint Barbara. Saint Barbara, right here, her father wanted, in order to preserve her virginity and keep her from being corrupted, ordered that she be kept in a tower. He was getting ready to leave town, and when he returned, she confessed to him, even though she'd been locked in her tower all that time, she confessed to him that she was a Christian. It's believed she lived in about the 2nd century. And her father then threatened to kill her. That's why you see him with the sword. She did escape. However, she was eventually, she's fleeing the tower here, but her father did capture her, brought her before the magistrate. She was tortured many times to try to get her to recant her Christianity. According to tradition, it says she did not. And miraculously, overnight, all of the wounds from her torture would heal, and she would be tortured the next day. Finally, it was decided she would just be executed. They were going to burn her at the stake. However, every time they came near her with lighted torches, the torches would go out. The mode of execution was changed to beheading, and her father then took his sword and he personally beheaded her. And that's how she suffered her martyrdom. However, her father didn't live very long, because on his way home he was struck by lightning and his body was consumed by fire. But as you can see, this very dramatic painting shows the whole story, and which is even more complicated than the bit I told you. But it's easy in this Renaissance work to just spend so much time looking at it. So I'll move on to the Sistine Chapel. That is the very end of the Vatican tour, and not surprisingly. This is what the Sistine Chapel looked like in about 1490. And if you see here, it already has some paintings hung here. And actually those may be tapestries. Anyway, but if you look at the ceiling, it's actually painted blue and has gold stars studded throughout the ceiling. But this is what it looks like now. And the reason it looks this way is because Michelangelo was commissioned to paint it. Julius was a great patron of the arts. Pope Julius succeeded after the short papacy I told you of the compromised pope, Pope Pius III, after Rodrigo de Borgia. Alexander VI was pope. Then Julius III becomes pope. Now, the thing about Julius was that he was very, the reason he chose the name Julius was not to honor any previous pope named Julius. It was in honor of Julius Caesar, because he saw himself as the head of the papal states. And he would fight wars, he would go to war. And if you've ever seen the movie The Agony and the Ecstasy, where Charlton Heston plays Michelangelo, Rex Harrison plays Pope Julius, and it is between them that this, and it's about the painting of the Sistine Chapel. But Pope Julius was definitely a warrior king, a warrior pope. He believed he needed the papal states in order to preserve the independence of the church and the papacy. That was his official line, but it was indeed about money and power. And he believed temporal authority as well as religious authority was essential. And he pursued it. He was a great patron of the arts, though. At the same time, he commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He also commissioned Raphael to paint his own apartments. Remember, he wouldn't live where the Borgia popes had lived, so he had to have new apartments, and to do that, and he had Raphael paint them. I covered the Raphael apartments last week when I talked about that part of the first part of the tour. But I have to admit, this work by Michelangelo is just impressive. It truly is. Michelangelo, when was initially approached by Julius, he was commissioned to paint the 12 apostles. He was just going to paint here in these alcoves. He was just going to paint the 12 apostles there. But he didn't want to paint the 12 apostles. He didn't want to paint it all, really. He saw himself as a sculptor. But Julius was persuasive, and Julius was very persuasive, and as a compromise, he told him he could paint any biblical scene he wanted. And he was very, so Michelangelo did undertake to paint the entire Sistine Chapel ceiling. He ended up in 1508 when he started painting. He designed his own scaffolding. By the way, the scaffolding allowed him to stand. A lot of people think of him as Charlton Heston portrayed him laying on his back painting the chapel for 4 years, but in truth he was able to paint standing up. He used bright colors because, as you can see there, he wanted them to be easily visible from the floor. On the lowest part of the ceiling, he painted the ancestors of Christ. Then above that, he alternated here the male and the female prophets. Then this is the ancestors of Christ here at this level. And then you have the male and the female prophets here. And then above that, he painted nine stories from the book of Genesis right here. And it was quite impressive. He begins, of course, with the creation. He shows Adam and Eve in the garden. I mean, this whole thing is just fantastic. It's so beautiful and so illuminated. You just stand there and look up. There are benches around the side. Of course, the floor is always crowded, and you can sit and look. But they do have to, I was surprised when I went, they have to remind, the first time I went, they had to remind people to be quiet, that it was a church. People talked constantly. And unfortunately, the group I was with was very annoying because even my seminary professor spoke during it. And I had to talk about him later. I said, this is a church. But it was one thing to whisper to us, but this is a very, very impressive, just impressive Sistine Chapel. I know you can probably see History Channel or Discovery Channel or National Geographic or somebody, Smithsonian, do a much better job than I am, but I'm only talking about what it was like for me to stand there. This is the ceiling laid out. It's hard to believe how he did what he did. But here you have, there's just so much. The ancestors of Christ, the stories, the prophets, you see. There's the ancestors of Christ, and there's the prophets right here. And then here's the stories from Genesis. They're just so impressive. It's all laid out. I can't believe he crammed that much in there. I had a little guide, a little sheet of paper like this, and I was trying to look at everything when I was there, but after an hour of craning my neck up to be able to look, it was just more than I could take in. I'm sure people spend days there and they still discover new things. His depiction of God, the Father. This is the creation of the moon and the sun, the two lights, one by day and one by night, surrounded by his angels, just powerful and dramatic. It's much like, it's become the standard depiction. It probably was before, and it is, of God as this bearded, powerful, high and exalted figure, which he should be. We should hold God in awe, but also remember this is the God who created us. And you certainly appreciate that as you look. See, here's that panel I just showed you right there with the creation of the sun and the moon. And then here we have the creation of Adam. There you have God once again surrounded by the angels. And he's created man in his own image. Adam is portrayed as just beautiful and innocent, is what Michelangelo wanted. And this is probably the most famous view. Looking at each other and their fingers not quite touching. That's maybe one of the most famous sections of the painting that you see. As a matter of fact, a lot of times you have to see the hands recreated. Well, here's the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. Yes, here they are taking the fruit from the serpent. There's the serpent handing them the forbidden fruit. And looks to me like the serpent is a woman, which is not too surprising because Renaissance times and even more believe that women are a source of sin because it has to do with sex. Oh, can't have that. And here we have Adam and Eve being driven from the Garden of Eden. This is the depiction of the flood. I have to admit there's so much going on in this one. I just couldn't take it all in. These are the people left behind. This is not Noah and his ark are over here. People are trying to climb on the outside of the ark, but of course they won't be able to survive. And other people are fleeing the flood. The desperation in this woman's eyes, the determination, the attempts to save children. Oh, it's just really awful. But his painting is just phenomenal. She's beautiful, isn't she? That face. She's very muscular for a woman. But it captures so much. How he could paint all that into each and every figure, I don't know. But the work is just exquisite. Of course, it was restored a few years ago. And the colors, you realize how bright they are, the way Michelangelo intended, had originally painted them. Some people worry that maybe they overcleaned it and removed some final details, but scientists have determined that Michelangelo only painted on the plaster while it was wet. He didn't come back afterwards and touch it up. And he considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. Of course, he's a brilliant sculptor too, but just so impressive. Now, this is also by Michelangelo, but this is the piece over the high altar. And this was done 33 years later after he was hired by a different pope. And 33 years later, he paints this area above the altar. This time, he chooses the Last Judgment. He goes from the beginning to the end, from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelations, the beginning to the end. And it's a magnificent painting also, very impressive. But you can tell there's a different kind of, still he's just as skilled, but I think the subject matter here is very impressive. If you look here we have Christ and riding on the clouds in heaven, coming from the heavens, Mary his mother Mary at his side, and there are all the saints and the heavenly hosts. Down here, and there you have the angels blowing their trumpets, sounding the end of the Last Judgment. On this side, you have souls being taken up to heaven. But the painting of Christ is truly impressive. So strong. Not the picture of Christ I've always pictured, but I have to admit it's compelling. Christ and the final judgment. Right here, this figure in the foreground is St. Bartholomew. St. Bartholomew was martyred, and he was supposedly he's one of the original 12 apostles, and he was skinned alive, and he's there holding his skin, which is the way he was often depicted in the way he was often depicted. After all, I've said it before, they had to have clues so you'd know who you were looking at. And when you saw a man holding his skin, well, then you knew it was St. Bartholomew. The only thing is that face on the skin, it looks like it's Michelangelo. He painted himself as that flayed skin hanging from the hands of St. Bartholomew. By the way, I have to admit, Charlton Heston was a good pick to play Michelangelo. He actually looks like him. I probably should have included a picture. But this is very powerful too. Here, as I said, here's a close-up of those angels blowing the trumpets, carrying the book of life with the names of those who are written in the book of life, who will go into heaven, being shown. And here you have the souls rising up to heaven. The angels, although why they need ropes to pull them up, I'm not quite sure. Some of them are being carried, some of them are being lifted. But these are the souls that are being saved. And unfortunately, these are the souls that are being damned. Look at this man, his anguish as he's dragged down to hell. Of course, it's funny, but Greek mythology slips into it. It was so ingrained in their life. And this is the boat that crosses the river Styx, which in Greek mythology supposedly is how people are transported to Hades. And Charon right here is the boat. He's the one who pilots the boat sails the boat to across the river Styx, and he's bringing all these bodies to deliver them into Hades, into hell. There's a close-up of Charon. Ugh. Michelangelo certainly could have an image of demons. And right here, on the other side, on the right-hand side, you have the devil himself. Ugh. Surrounded by all these demons and the souls of the damned. It's enough to give you nightmares. But it's the way they saw it. It reminded them. I know people feared the loss of heaven and the pains of hell. And this certainly very dramatically shows you the difference between the glories of heaven and the pains of hell. It's very impressive to think that Michelangelo painted all of this. Well, of course, the paintings he did, these are not his paintings on the first level. His paintings start up here, up on the top of the Sistine Chapel. That was over 5,000 square feet of roof, and he painted it in a period of 4 years. It was amazing, and he pretty much painted it all himself. It was the work of one man. Raphael used assistants, but for Michelangelo, his assistants were allowed to carry the plaster and carry the paint and everything to him. But he's the only one who applied the paint to the ceiling. And this part, of course, was painted 33 years later. Well, it was time to leave. And even leaving is a thing of beauty. This is a stairwell. It's a wonderful stairwell. It's actually from a design. There's another stairwell like it that was designed in Renaissance times in the year 1502, I believe, by I can't think of it, Bramante, I think the man's name was. But it's actually a double helix. He designed, if you look, there's 2 entrances or exits. The thing is that he designed a circular stairwell inside a circular stairwell, a double helix. And that way people could go up without ever encountering people who were going down. Brilliant. It was, I imagine many of you have been to the Vatican Museum, and I'm sure that I didn't show your favorites, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for being with me today, and until next time, God bless you.